Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Development Management Committee meeting to determine the application we have in front of us tonight. I'll just go through some announcements and house rules. I'm Councillor Dave Taylor, Chair of the committee. Please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent mode. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and a recording will be available on the Council's website. House rules. In view of COVID coming back to haunt us again, those attending in person, please keep a safe social distance and wear masks in the building, except when seated in the chamber. Remember to scan the NHS COVID-19 contact tracing QR poster at the entrance to the chamber. If you have not already done so, you can do later on. Speakers in the chamber, remember to switch on and speak directly into the mic. Switch off when finished speaking. Speakers online are requested to switch on their cameras and microphone when addressed. Any person interrupting the meeting may be asked to leave or be disconnected if online. Before starting with the agenda items, I would like to go around the chamber for councillors and officers to introduce themselves, please. On the left, starting at the front. Bert, do you want to introduce yourself and the reason? Yeah, I'll come back, yeah.
I'm Bert Young, the committee clerk. Thank you.
Yvonne Sampo, Principal Planner.
Councillor Amjad Ali, Barnfield Ward.
Councillor Lee Bridgen, Crawley Ward.
Chris Godden, Highway Development Control Manager.
David Gertler, Airport Planning Consultant.
Clive Inwoods, Team Leader for Strategic Applications.
I'm Vernon Cole. I'm advising the local authority on noise matters.
Mark Hinnells, advising the council on climate change and carbon.
Nicola Monk, Corporate Director for Inclusive Economy.
Sue Frost, Service Director for Sustainable Development.
Alejo Perez Monsalvo, Development Director of London Luton Airport Operations Limited.
Neil Bradford, Head of Communications, London Luton Airport Operations.
Councillor Asa Masood, Icknield Ward.
Anne Donlan, a councillor in Northwell.
Councillor Smart Rashid from Saints Ward.
Councillor Abbas Hussain, Dalla Ward.
Councillor Mahmood Hussain, Farley Ward.
Here we go. John.
John Steele, Queen's Counsel. I'm legal advisor to the council.
Stephen Sparshott, Planning Solicitor.
And last but not least,
Councillor Agley, Vice Chair, South Ward. Thank you.
Sorry? You did? Okay. Okay. Without further ado, I'll go through the emergency evacuation procedure. Turn left, follow the green emergency exit signs to the main town hall entrance and proceed to the assembly point in St George's Square. the agenda proper now. Are there any apologies for this evening?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Franks, Chair.
Minutes of the previous meeting on the 27th of October 2021. You approve the minutes?
Approved, Chair.
And I'll sign them in due course. Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act.
Non applicable, Chair.
Any disclosures of interest tonight by members? Any urgent business?
No, Chair.
And references from committees and other bodies?
None, Chair.
Okay, so we'll go now straight on to the agenda item, London Luton Airport, Airport Way, page 35.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Clive Inwards, Team Leader for Strategic Applications. Assisting me tonight with the presentation are Dr. Mark Hinnells, who will lead on climate change issues, and Vernon Cole, who will lead on noise issues associated with the application. The local planning authority are also assisted by the council's retained airport consultant, David Gertler, and John Steele QC, who may assist with any questions members may have following the presentation. So this section 73 planning application seeks to make amendments to planning permission reference 15/00950/Varcon to accommodate 90 million passengers per annum and to amend the day and nighttime noise contours. The application has to be reported to committee as it is seeking amendments to a major planning application and is specifically seeking to vary conditions 8, 10, 22, 24 and 28 of the earlier permission. The application was submitted in January 2021 and was subject to public consultation on the 18th of January 2021. There was subsequently a request for further information under the environmental assessment regulations, and further information was provided in the form of a revised noise chapter of the environmental statement and a carbon reduction plan. Reconsultation was undertaken on the receipt of this further information on the 2nd of June 2021. Clarification was sought in relation to additional points made, and upon that, a further round of consultation was undertaken on the 9th of September 2021. So there is an update on this item, which has been provided in the update report. From the update, members will note that the airport master plan has now been reported to the Overview and Scrutiny Board on the 22nd of November. And following this was reported to the executive on the 23rd of November 2021, where the executive voted to adopt the use of the airport master plan for the purposes of policy LLP 6 of the local plan. Additionally, the update report sets out that further representations have been received to the application since the publication of the committee report, including 3 additional responses in support of the application and 3 representations opposing the proposed development. The points raised in objection are addressed in detail in the update report and include further comment from the planning authority's noise consultant, the detailed report from the airport operator for the 2021 summer period prepared by Bickerdike Allen, the extract from the adopted local plan relating to policy LLP 6 and the accompanying supporting text, and updated planning conditions. Finally, the update report requires an amendment to the originally proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement to remove the reference to providing for one-off grants. Members should also note that updated planning conditions provided at attachment 4 of the update report, where conditions 5, 9, 14, 22 and 24 are proposed to be varied as indicated. Further to the publication of the update, another 5 representations have been received, including 1 representation in support and 4 opposing the development. These have been emailed to members in advance of the committee meeting, but hard copies of these late representations are also available and provided here at the meeting. The letter in support was from Unite the Union, which emphasises the importance of the airport to the local economy in terms of existing jobs and future employment, skills and training. 3 of the 4 representations opposing the proposed development reiterated comments made in relation to noise, pollution, traffic and climate change, and these have been addressed in the original report. The fourth representation was from Ladacan and repeated representations provided in their previous responses. I've summarised the Ladacan letter and also provide comments on the points raised. This now follows. Firstly, it questions the with-without development scenarios. These have been addressed in the office report and will also be addressed in the noise consultant's presentation. Secondly, it challenges the recommendation. However, it is considered that the recommendation is safe, that the development applied for is clear, and that the issue of mitigation compensation has been satisfactorily addressed in the report. Thirdly, it suggests the background information in relation to, amongst other things, the temporary nature of the noise impacts is misleading. This is not accepted. The periods of change are up to 2028 and then 2031. Fourthly, it seeks to amplify national aviation policy. Whilst this is useful, it is considered that the committee report satisfactorily covers national and local policy, and the Council's climate change consultant's presentation provides further comment on this. Fifthly, it raises queries regarding the noise contours in the screening report not matching those in the revised noise chapter to the environmental statement. In answer to this, the original screening report used the International Civil Aviation Organization's accreditation for aircraft, whereas the revised environmental statement included noise corrections relating to the A321neo aircraft specifically. Sixthly, the government position on climate change is raised in representations, but this has been addressed in the committee report and will be covered by the Council's consultant in his presentation. And finally, the economic benefits associated with the airport are challenged. However, this has been dealt with in the previous update as well as the committee report. So a final verbal update on the first page of the committee report under recommendations, where it says to resolve that the requirements of Part 2 of Schedule 4 of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017 are satisfied. This should be amended to read the requirements of Regulation 18 and Schedule 4 of the Town and Country Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations are satisfied. So I'll just take you onto the slides. Slide 1, this is the application site outlined in red, which is the site of London Luton Airport, occupying a 245 hectare site on the southeastern edge of Luton, approximately 3 kilometres east of junction 10 of the M1 motorway. To the north of the airport and south of Eaton Green Road are located commercial premises, whilst to the north of Eaton Green Road, the land use is predominantly residential. Immediately to the west of the airport is an area of commercial and industrial land uses, and beyond are the Parktown areas and then the town centre of Luton. To the south, east and northeast of the airport, the land uses are predominantly rural in character, comprising a mix of farmland with small settlements. Summary's Castle, a scheduled monument, lies to the south of the airport, and the Grade 1 listed Luton Hoo and the associated Grade 2-star Park and Gardens lie to the southwest. It is noted that the application involves no physical development. Members will see from page 53 of the agenda that the main planning considerations relate to the principle of the development, consideration of the environmental statement addendum, uncertainties, climate change, noise, traffic and parking, air quality, health and well-being, economic benefits, airspace change, public safety zones, breaches of conditions, and if the proposal is contrary to the local plan. The report then considers the planning balance and the issue of developer contributions. On the issues of climate change and noise, I will ask the Council's consultants to present their views in due course. Firstly, as set out in the report, there is in principle support from national aviation policy for airports, such as Luton, to make best use of their existing runways. Further, there is no requirement from national aviation policy for individual planning applications for airports beyond Heathrow to demonstrate a need for their proposed development or for associated additional air traffic movements and increased passenger numbers. It is clear that the current planning application entails no additional infrastructure, but seeks to vary conditions on the original permission to allow for an increase in passenger numbers, and which will be reflected in a small increase in aircraft movements of 0.75% of the total movements in 2019, when the airport reached 18 million passengers per annum. Whilst there needs to be a balance with the environmental impacts of development, both national and local policy provide in principle support for airports making best use of their existing infrastructure. The current application seeks to vary conditions attached to the original planning permission for the enlargement of the terminal building and expansion of the airport infrastructure to accommodate up to 18 million passengers per annum, which was EIA development and environmental impact assessment development. As such, an environmental statement addendum has been provided to accompany the current application. The environmental statement addendum chapters have been carefully considered and their conclusions accepted. In relation to uncertainties about forecasting, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, fleet mix and the introduction of new generation aircraft, Brexit and the direction of climate change policy raised in representations, these issues are addressed in the report in paragraphs 83 to 89. This also leads on to the issue of climate change, which will now be covered by the Council's consultant, Dr. Mark Hinnells.
I hope everybody can read those slides. If I can take you through them, I will first cover the policy situation with aviation, then assess the application against the policy, and then consider potential conditions. I've split the policy section into two slides. The first was up to my advice note, which was provided in May this year, and the second covers a policy which has happened since that advice note. Up to my advice note, up to the point where the advice note was written, it was clear that aviation policy was governed by two pieces of guidance: the Airports National Policy Statement, ANPS, and making best use of existing runways, MBU. From a climate change point of view, it's important to understand that those were written when the UK carbon target in the Climate Change Act was an 80% cut in CO2 by 2050. And in terms of policy hierarchy, it was quite clear at government level that aviation policy should be set at the international level first, because it's such the marketplace for aviation is such an international one, and then at the national level. Making best use indicated that climate change should be dealt with at national level, though it did not exclude consideration at local level. But the main local issues were surface access, noise, and air quality. The Climate Change Act in 2019 was amended from an 80% cut to net zero by 2050. That left aviation in quite a difficult place in policy terms. And the Committee on Climate Change last Christmas, in its advice to government on the 6th carbon budget, advised that whilst aviation had been outside UK targets, should be brought within UK targets, and the UK should aim at a 78% cut by 2033 to 37, the 6th carbon budget period, and include aviation within that net zero target. Government accepted that broad recommendation about that target, that aviation should be included in a net zero target, but it did not accept the detailed recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. So that was the position in policy terms. It was relatively fluid at the time that my first advice note was written. If I can go on to the next slide and discuss what's happened since then. So since then, over the summer, we had a consultation from the government on Jet Zero, which explored a number of routes for meeting net zero, which focused on technological solutions to dealing with climate change rather than capacity constraint. That was a very clear message within that consultation. One of the major mechanisms to reduce carbon emissions is a fuel known as sustainable aviation fuel. That is, it behaves like kerosene, but it's developed from other sources, with up to a 75% mandate to use that fuel in aircraft going forward by 2050. There were options on hydrogen. Government looked again at how to price carbon in the UK economy, and carbon now in government policy has a much higher price, an order of magnitude higher than it did as a result of a decision in September of this year than it did prior to that. An order of magnitude higher today, 4 times higher in 2030, and twice as high in 2050. In other words, carbon is a significant cost and it should be taken into policy. Government also looked at, had various requests to review ANPS, the airport's national policy statement. It chose very deliberately not to review ANPS, and by implication, its sister publication, making best use of its existing runways, which is the most relevant policy here. And we have to take it that means they stand. And it was quite clear in Jet Zero as well that those policy documents stand. Again, literally just before COP26, government published a policy strategy on getting to net zero. And again, that message was emphasised that the route to decarbonise aviation was a technical one rather than through capacity constraint. I should say through all of this that because of the Climate Change Act, the Secretary of State still has a duty under the Act, a duty in law to meet net zero. And whilst it will be challenging to deliver the Jet Zero strategy, we have to recognise that the policy is to deliver net zero through technical solutions rather than through capacity constraint. And it's hard to see either an inspector or a court, if this went to appeal or to judicial review, it's hard to see an inspector or a court setting that aside. And therefore, we have to take it that the current policy is to meet climate change obligations through technical solutions rather than capacity constraint. So that's the clear policy background. So assessing the proposal against that policy background on the next slide, if I may, I would say that the proposal has relatively limited impact in carbon terms, and I'll go through that. There is no physical development, so there is no embodied carbon. Apart from that, we describe carbon in 3 scopes. Scope 1 is what's burned on site, fuel that's burned on site. Scope 2 is electricity that's used on site, but which creates carbon elsewhere in the economic system. And scope 3 is emissions that are used by tenants or visitors, that are produced by tenants or visitors to the site. So going through those scopes, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions can be dealt with by condition, and we have a draft carbon reduction plan before us. Scope 3 surface access emissions, in other words, visitors to the site, are being addressed through the DART, which is moving people onto public transport, and electric vehicles, and there is further potential to reduce that impact through on-site or near-to-site renewables. The big issue is scope 3 aviation, and the increase is a small percentage change on what has already been consented. So in people terms, it's a 5% increase in the number of passengers, but it's a smaller percentage in terms of an increase in terms of in terms of emissions. The environmental statement, which is now a year old or so, the claim was made in the environmental statement that increase was insignificant compared to a UK carbon planning assumption for aviation of 37.5 megatons of carbon. It was also compared to 23 megatons of carbon that the Committee on Climate Change explored. But in all honesty, the appropriate comparison is a comparison to net zero, and there is an impact in terms of comparison to net zero. However, as I've made clear, government has clarified that there are technical solutions to achieve net zero rather than capacity constraint. And as I've said, the Secretary of State still has a duty in the Act, in the Climate Change Act, to meet net zero. So in effect, it will make it slightly harder to meet that net zero target, but that net zero target still needs to be met. And that's the overriding conclusion. The last slide, can the proposal be made acceptable through conditions in terms of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions? We believe that carbon action plan that's been proposed can be secured by conditions, with minor tweaks. I think ideally it should be reviewed in line with UK carbon budgets, those budget periods, and the UK carbon targets. And I've pointed out one area where the provision, for example, for electric vehicle charging is likely to need to be revisited because of the policy at national level to phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. The provision in the plan at the moment is light compared to that UK target, and that's pretty much me done on climate change. But I think the proposal can be made acceptable in terms through conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, Vernon Cole, going to talk about noise now. The first thing I'd like to do is put this application in some sort of context in terms of the scale of noise effects that one might predict. It's fair to say that the increase in the number of passengers is not a driving force behind any changes in noise. It would be changes in the number of aircraft movements that would affect noise levels. So if we look at the application in those terms, we can see that 19 million passengers per annum are forecast to be carried by about 142,500 ATMs. 18 million passengers per annum, the throughput reached in 2019, required 141,500 ATMs roughly. So just over 1,000 movements less. So put another way, this application, while it's for 1 million more passengers, is for an increase in the number of ATMs that amounts to about 0.7%. Now, if there's no change in the aircraft mix at all, I can tell you that that increase in the number of movements will be equivalent to a noise level change of 0.03 of 1 decibel. Effectively no change. Now, if we look at the application in terms of movement numbers compared to what was forecast in the 2012, or the baseline year used for 2012 ES, there were 99,300 ATMs in 2011. So 19 million passengers per annum requires a 44% increase in movements over this figure. An ATM, sorry, is an air transport movement. An aircraft movement. I don't think there are that many ATMs in the country anymore. Assuming no change in the aircraft mix, this would be equivalent to a change in noise level of just over 1.5 decibels. While this is a minor negative change, on its own, it would not normally be considered to give rise to a significant impact. We should also note that the 2012 ES forecast that 18 million passengers per annum would require 156,840 ATMs by 2028. Now, the current application for 19 million passengers per annum requires fewer movements, in fact, 9% fewer movements than were indicated in 2012. The reason for this essentially are that as new aircraft are brought on stream, the modernised lower noise aircraft, they in fact have higher carrying capacity as well. So you tend to require fewer aircraft now to carry more passengers. But again, assuming the aircraft mix did not change, what we're talking about here for 19 million passengers per annum is a noise level that's actually lower than was forecast for 18 million passengers per annum in the 2012 ES. I think it's worth looking at the noise timeline over the years. And I go back to 2011, I project forward to about 2030. The blue bars at the bottom of the graph represent the number of passengers forecast to pass through the airport each year based upon the 2012 ES. And the blue line is the forecast area of the 57 decibel noise contour for each of those years. And what we can see is that originally forecast was a fairly gradual increase in the number of passengers up to 18 million per annum by around 2026, 2027. And certainly by 2028, there would be the full capacity 18 million passengers passing through the airport. Now, the associated noise was going to increase gradually in accordance with that gradual increase in passengers until probably around the year 2024. But we secured by condition a commitment that the airport would then reduce that noise contour through the use of the lower noise modern aircraft. And so the noise levels actually go down in spite of the passenger numbers going up until around 2028. Now, if we then look at the orange bars, these are the actual numbers of passenger movements up until 2021 and the forecast number of passenger movements according to the revised ES for this application. And what's quite clear is that from around 2015, there was a significant increase in the number of passengers running through the airport, more than was originally predicted in the 2012 ES. And this had the effect of increasing the noise levels generated by the airport so that the actual area of the 57 dB contour started to deviate from what was predicted in the 2012 ES. So we had a number of years where there were excesses of noise over the forecast level. And by around 2017, those excesses actually were above the maximum limit that was agreed for the short-term period up to 2024. Now, the effects of coronavirus are clearly seen in the dramatic dip down to 2020. And the 19 million passengers per annum ES forecast that there would be a big rebound in 2021. And in fact, they expected that would be the noisiest year due to the number of aircraft running through the airport. As it turns out, we have seen the actual noise contours for 2021, and they are even lower than 2020. So it turns out the coronavirus has had a longer lasting effect than was originally thought when the forecasts were produced for the ES. So we have a situation here where the application currently seeks an increase in the permissible noise contour that was determined by the forecast noise contour area for 2021, which we can see has not materialized. So I'll come back to that later because it's significant in terms of the conditions that might need to be applied. But what one can see is that there is a diminution in noise level as represented by the noise contour from 2021, or certainly from 2022, if things rebound that quickly, until it starts to merge with the originally forecast noise contours. And although we don't quite get down to the low limit agreed for condition 10 in 2028, forward projecting the noise levels over the next couple of years, the original forecasts for the 2028 noise contour limit would be reached by around 2030, 2031. Next slide, please. This is the same story, but this is for the nighttime period. The bars at the bottom, the blue were the originally forecast and the orange are the actual passenger throughputs. The noise contour area is larger, which is why it appears higher above those bars. That's because the noise contour limit for the night is set at a lower value, so it covers a bigger area. But pretty much the same story can be seen, whereby the noise levels ran ahead of those forecast so that we had an excess above the agreed condition in the years up to 2019, from about 27 to 2019. It was originally forecast that we'd be above the permitted level in 2021, but that has turned out not to be the case. Whether we will be above the permitted level in 2022 is in the lap of the COVID gods and how quickly the business rebounds. But we have no other forecasts from the airport beyond those that I'm showing here. Now, some conclusions from looking at those timelines, and as I've said, the growth in passenger numbers and therefore the air transport movements has been much quicker than anticipated. And as a result, noise levels and associated contours have been higher than forecast between about 2013 and 2019. 18 million passengers per annum was achieved in 2019, 9 years ahead of the originally forecast 2028. 2019 noise levels were higher, even with a lower ATM figure, than were forecast for 2028, and the contour limits set out in Planning Condition 10 have been exceeded in the years 2017 to 2019. The principal reason for this is that new lower noise aircraft has not been introduced at a rate that has kept pace with the rate of increase in the ATMs. Now, all of these facts were known before the 19 million passenger application was made. The effects of COVID on passenger throughput in 2021 are clearly seen in those graphs, and the rebound for 2021 has not materialized. Importantly, the commitment for the reduced contour limits can still be achieved, albeit 3 years after the originally forecast 2028, again, principally due to COVID-19. Meeting the lower noise contour limits is a vital commitment if the application is to meet government policy aspirations. In my view, that is important because the government expects airports to share the benefits of technological change with local communities. So as aircraft get quieter, the airport should overall produce less noise, not simply increase the number of movements to compensate for the quietness of the aircraft. And that is effectively government policy, sharing the benefits. And being able to achieve the lower noise level that was agreed in 2014 and enshrined in Condition 10 for 2028, being able to achieve that in 2030 or 2031 is important. And it's COVID that's caused that 3-year delay. And we've seen that effect at other airports. So the overall noise effects are that the revised ES indicates that noise level differences in the worst case year between the with development 19 million passengers case and without development 18 million passengers Condition 10 limits are less than 3 decibels. So noise level changes due to the new application are always less than 3 decibels. In fact, for daytime operations, the noise level differences are less than 1 decibel for all assessment years. For nighttime operations, noise level increases are up to 1.9 decibels from 2021 onwards, but they drop to less than 1 decibel by 2028. Now, judged by this standard in isolation, noise effects would not be considered significant. The Stansted Airport 35 Plus application assessed similar noise level changes and came to the same conclusion. This was accepted by the inspector panel and the Secretary of State in granting consent for the application. So to some extent, there's a precedent here in terms of considering applications with this scale of noise change. By the applicant's own definition, however, significant noise effects are assessed due to additional dwellings being exposed to noise levels above the significant observed adverse effect level, which is 55 decibels averaged over an 8-hour night, while also experiencing noise level of increase of 1 decibel or more. The highest number of properties expected to experience these significant effects is 1,877, which is not a small number, and that's forecast to occur in 2022. Now, these significant effects must be mitigated in order for the application to be acceptable in noise terms. Now, there is some concern that the with versus without development cases has not been correctly addressed in this application. My view is that this comparison is a valid comparison. If one had used as a baseline the operating data for 2019, which was the last year of, let's say, normal non-COVID operations, if one had used that as a baseline, then the noise conditions in 2019 were actually higher, or there was more noise in 2019 than are permitted by the Condition 10 in 2028. So what one would find is if one compared the 19 million passenger application to the baseline figures in 2019, one would conclude that noise effects were lower than if you compare them to the 18 million passenger per annum Condition 10 limits. So I think making that comparison is a more stringent case, and that's why I would prefer that as a correct analysis of the effects of this application as opposed to comparing them to 2019 base levels. Now, there are some other considerations to take into account. The forecasts in the revised ES do not reflect the actual speed of recovery from COVID-19. As we saw, the actual noise levels in 2021 were considerably lower than forecast. Now, we're still having to base our assessment on the forecast operating numbers from 2022 onwards. There's no certainty that those are going to be accurate, but providing they represent the maximum extent of operating numbers in future years, then we have an understanding as to what the noise effects are and how we need to control them. If COVID persists even longer, then it may well be that operating numbers in 2022 do not match those forecasts, in which case noise levels will be lower. Obviously, if this rolls on, we might even get to the stage where the noise levels generated do not even require an increase in the permitted contour noise limits. But that's not something that's in my power to forecast, so I can only go on the basis of what is shown in the ES at the moment. The 19 million passengers per annum noise analysis used slightly more realistic noise corrections for new generation low noise aircraft compared to the variants they're replacing. However, there are still some question marks regarding the noise data used for the Airbus A321. The NEO variant is operated by Wizz Air, and measurements of the activities by Wizz Air demonstrate that it is not as quiet as the certification figures would have one believe. The new modelling reflects that to some extent, and that is why the contours in the revised ES are slightly different to those in the original ES. There is still some work that Airbus may be able to do to continue to reduce noise levels from the Airbus A321 NEO, and of course it will be beneficial if those can come to fruition. Now, as I mentioned, mitigation is necessary in order to deal with the significant noise effects that are assessed, and enhanced sound insulation is proposed as a response to those significant adverse effects. And the assessment identifies a number of properties expected to qualify. One concern is that many dwellings may not benefit from the enhanced sound insulation required to mitigate significant effects in time to prevent those effects from occurring. These things take time to roll out, and I don't think this is a unique situation at Luton, but it's something to bear in mind. It's also worth noting that this application does not try to address the issue of previous conditioned contour limits having been exceeded historically. So significant noise effects are associated with the application. Mitigation is proposed, but there have been and will continue to be several years in which condition 10 noise contour limits are exceeded, and those were not mitigated at the time they took place. My overall conclusions in relation to this application are that the structure and the content of the revised ES noise chapter, although modified since the first submission, still does not present the noise case in a manner that is clearly understandable to all readers. The use of aircraft movement forecasts which do not seem to match reasonable short-term expectations is not helpful. I think members of the public are rightly concerned that the forecasts clearly were significantly higher than actually occurred in 2021. So there is uncertainty as to how accurate they are moving forward. The application offers no remedy, as I said earlier, to the excess noise experienced in the community since 2017 and is expected to continue for some years in the future, arising from the much more rapid growth in ATMs than originally forecast in the 2012 ES. This has led to the condition 10 contour limits being breached for a number of years. Now that the analysis has been extended beyond 2028 and the noise contour limits originally applicable to that year are demonstrated as being achievable approximately 3 years later, I believe that the application is in line with their government policy for airport operators to share the benefit of technological enhancements in noise reduction with affected communities. On balance, therefore, while significant noise effects are forecast to arise, they are not sufficient in scale or extent to warrant refusal of this application purely on noise grounds. This is, however, contingent on mitigation in the form of enhanced sound insulation being provided for the affected dwellings on a scale and a timeline that minimises the occurrence of significant effects. Thank you.
Yvonne, can we go back to the red line slide, please? Thanks. So just to continue the presentation, with regard to transport and parking issues, the submitted transport assessment demonstrates that the small increase in traffic volumes associated with this proposal would not have a significant adverse impact upon the operation of the highway network. The transport assessment and car parking management plan are considered to be acceptable. Further, the application included an updated travel plan, and with an early review of the airport surface access strategy to be provided through the legal agreement, this is considered to be acceptable. In relation to air quality, the proposed expansion to cater for up to 90 million passengers per annum is not considered to have a significant effect upon air quality, and in terms of the predicted impacts upon air quality, the proposed development is considered to accord with both national and local planning policy. In terms of aircraft movements, it is noted that the proposed increase in flight numbers works out at an average of only an additional 3 flights per day. With regard to health and wellbeing, the committee report considers this in paragraphs 161 to 167. In conclusion of this issue, while the environmental statement addendum has identified a negative impact on population health arising from increased exposure to noise, this would be a small change in risk factors for health for a small minority of the population over a limited period of time. This has to be weighed against the longer-term health benefits of reducing poverty levels and inequality from the economic benefits of the proposal. Which leads on to the economic benefits of the proposal itself. The report considers these in paragraphs 168 to 177. Economic benefits of the proposal result from additional passenger numbers supporting airport staff as well as the wider area. It is also considered that these additional passenger numbers would safeguard and sustain the continued commercial viability of the airport, and by extension, safeguard and sustain existing jobs. The proposal is considered to comply with policy LLP 13 of the local plan, which is positive in relation to applications that deliver economic growth and prosperity to serve Luton and the wider sub-region. It is also considered that real social and economic benefits would be delivered to the local area and sub-region, which would weigh heavily in favour of the proposed development and should be given significant weight. The report also addresses the issue of airspace change, given that this was raised in representation responses, but it is clear that airspace changes are administered under a separate regulatory regime to that of the planning system, and therefore do not need consideration as part of this application. Similarly, the issue of changes to the public safety zones does not need consideration, as changes to the public safety zones are again administered by the Civil Aviation Authority and have only recently been updated. Finally, the report also considers the existing breach of conditions at paragraphs 185 to 192 of the report, as well as the issue of being contrary to the development plan. On this latter point, the application has been advertised as a departure from the development plan. Drawing these issues together, the report considers the planned balance of the proposal at paragraphs 200 to 217, weighing up the economic benefits of the proposal against environmental impacts. And finally, the report sets out the developer contributions and the list of measures that would be secured through a Section 106 legal agreement following any resolution to grant planning permission. These include provision, implementation, monitoring and review of travel plans for passengers and staff, an early review of the airport surface access strategy, provision and an update to the noise alleviation measures, provision and update to the current employment skills and training programme, provision, implementation, monitoring and review of a carbon reduction strategy, and provision of an annual airport monitoring fee and Section 106 monitoring fee. So in conclusion, it is considered that the economic benefits of the proposal outweigh the temporary adverse environmental impacts, and thus that the variation to condition 8 to allow an increase to 90 million passengers per annum, and the variation of condition 10 to increase the areas covered by the daytime and nighttime noise contours for a temporary period are acceptable, subject to the appropriate compensation being secured. On that basis, the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions, including the updated conditions set out in the update and the completion of the necessary Section 106 agreement to facilitate the developer contributions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions by members? Questions only at this time. Councillor Abbas.
Thank you, Chair. Clive, page 51. Going to the last paragraph, public consultation. Direct consultation, total consulted 36, supported 262, objections 963. That doesn't add up. What was the total number that you consulted?
Should I answer that? So, sorry, David Gertler. We consulted but did advertisements to notify people as well as site notices. So in terms of the consultation, we targeted specific groups. We didn't do all neighbourhood consultation. So it was 36 organisations, groups that were consulted. So you'll see in the appendix to the committee report quite a few of the parish councils and other bodies who replied are included in there. So they were groups that were notified of the development. Obviously, the press releases, press notices, those kind of things resulted in a significant response. And then the organisations obviously notified their members as well.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I understand. But normally when I look at that document, we do the consultation differently. So I was thinking you missed a few zeros there. But obviously you're talking about organisations and committees, so it makes sense. Thank you. Last one, sorry. Page 116. Fishpool Street Residential. It doesn't mention which parish or town or council they're from.
I would have to look that up. If I can get back to you on that. I got the feeling it was in Stolbans, but I'll have to check. Okay.
Can I ask you, in terms of the noise, have I got it right that you are saying 2022 would be probably the worst year and then it'll go down? Is that correct?
It might be helpful if we could show that particular slide again. Yep. As you can see, Councillor, that the original forecast was that 2021 would be the noisiest year, and after that the noise levels would reduce. 2021 has turned out to be far from the noisiest year. It was quieter than 2020. But if we take the worst case assumption that things will rebound as expected in 2022, then 2022 will be the noisiest year, after which noise levels will reduce.
And 2028, because of the new aircraft coming in, it will reduce further. Is that right?
That is correct. The basis of the noise analysis assumes or allows for older aircraft to be replaced by new aircraft, which are better technology, more fuel efficient, and most importantly for us, quieter. So even though you might have similar numbers of movements, because on aggregate each movement produces less noise, you get less noise overall.
In terms of the air quality, 154, page 68, there is nationally recognized that the air quality have a major impact in the local air quality. I do not see anywhere in the report the mitigation, what the applicant intends to do in terms of the improving the air quality, in particularly those areas that are immediately under the fly path, being that the area of the South Ward, Luton and Farley, and number of schools which are immediately, as soon as the aircraft takes off, are under the fly path. 3 schools, yeah? And further to, as it goes not very far, over Stockwood Park at Stockwood Academy. I don't see very much proposal in terms of mitigation, what is being proposed in terms of that.
Sorry, and firstly, just to answer the Fishpool question, it is St Albans. Postcode is AL3 in St Albans. In terms of air quality, the air quality impacts which were assessed in the environmental impact assessment, none of them breach or get near to the air quality standards or air quality limits set by government. And ultimately, the air quality in some respects is improving as, I mean, it was a bit similar with the New Century Park application that we discussed, where obviously cars in the area will be going greener. So in the future, and with aircraft emissions declining in the future, things are improving as well. But the air quality standards were such that I do believe we've got Andrew Loosley on online as well. But in terms of air quality standards and air quality limits set by the government, it wasn't an issue. The actual increase, I think, as Clive said, is roughly equivalent to 3 aircraft movements a day. The overall increase assessed in the environmental impact assessment is not significant, is not rising, and it's not one of the air quality management areas. The worst affected area currently at the airport tends to be the drop-off zone, and that doesn't even, my recollection is it doesn't breach or reach the air quality limits set by DEFRA, the government department.
What I'm from my personal experience going into the areas that I'm talking about, which are immediately under the fly path. On the takeoff, you can't even have a conversation or nobody can hear you. And the air quality is also the one that, in terms of that, I'm asking what is there anything suggested that, you're saying that it will, and I accepted that the aircraft will improve from 2028. In between that period, is there anything being suggested?
Sorry, Chair.
Got the relevant officer to has put his hand up. I've just been told, although I can't see it from my screen. Andrew Loosley. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, Chair.
Oh, there you are.
It was just to say that David's correct, that the environmental statement didn't actually predict there would be any significant impacts. In terms of pollution under the flight path, it's not normally an air quality issue, in that the previous studies into this sort of thing, particularly looking at the extensive work that was done around the Heathrow proposal for expanding capacity there, have all concluded that the most significant effect of increasing airport capacity is actually from surface access. So it would be cars that we would be looking at, and out of all of the pollutants we'd be looking at, it's really nitrogen dioxide that would be the biggest concern. All of the monitoring that we do as a borough council, in addition to monitoring undertaken by the airport and also the airport owner, have all shown that actually we aren't in danger of getting a breach any relevant receptors. So, the key thing really normally here is looking along Eaton Green Road. There's one location there that in the past has been within 10% of the value on occasions, which would be the sort of level where we'd start to look at it, but that's generally been as an exception rather than as a rule. And from the submission that we received, I was satisfied that we shouldn't be looking at a significant impact and breaches of the LAQM standards that we have to work to as an authority.
Thank you, Chair. I've a couple of questions, if I may. The first question is, I just wanted to check my understanding and perhaps seek clarification. I think I heard in the noise report that some 1,877 dwellings would be impacted by potentially a 1 to 1.9 decibel increase, which may not sound much, but is logarithmic scale. I was just wondering whether that equates also to the increase in the distance of the noise contour, or if it doesn't, how many dwellings are actually impacted by the proposed increases in the noise contour from, I think it's 19.4 kilometres square to 21.6 kilometres square, and 37.2 kilometres square to 42.9 kilometres squared for the sort of the night and day figures.
So just to clarify, what the applicant has done in order to identify noise that reaches what we call a significant adverse effect, he's considered any noise level increase of 1 decibel or more that's associated with the noise being above the threshold that's called the SOAEL, the Significant Observed Adverse Effect Level, which is defined in the Noise Policy Statement for England. And there are no significant effects arising during the daytime because all noise level increases are less than 1 dB. But there are significant effects arising during the night time because the number of people exposed to noise levels above SOAEL, which is 55 decibels at night, and also experiencing an increase in noise of 1 decibel or more, is about 1,872, I think is the number. 77, apologies. It is related to the contour area because effectively you have to be within the 55 decibel contour area and experience this 1 decibel increase. So the number of properties that are affected, or the actual properties that are affected, are clearly identifiable and should be targeted by the noise mitigation scheme.
And if I may, my other question is, it's just in relation to the the sustainable aviation fuel, which I think was mentioned earlier in the earlier part of the report. I was just wondering, does that act from I guess carbon dioxide and hydrocarbon nitrous oxide emission point of view? Does that act in exactly the same way as a normal aviation fuel? Is it just purely the sustainable way perhaps that the fuel is produced that makes a difference? I was just curious about that. Thank you.
If I can answer that, the tailpipe emissions, if you like, are identical. It's just that the fuel is produced in a way that has a lower carbon dioxide content. So that is the fuel production that has a benefit, if you like. It's produced from a combination of materials, some biofuels, some waste products, and so on. So there are quite a diverse set of routes to produce sustainable aviation fuel, and each route has a different benefit and a different impact. But in terms of the impact compared to kerosene, there is a reduction, not to zero, but there is a reduction compared to burning kerosene, and if you like, in total life cycle emissions.
Okay, thank you. So there would be no difference in emissions, but I guess as a counter to that, there would be no need to upgrade aircraft or whatever to be able to use it.
It's a relatively drop-in solution. It's a bit like burning wood fuel in a power station. You get the same tailpipe emissions, but you've offset the fuel in producing wood in the first place, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions around noise level. On the report, forgive me if it has been mentioned, I've seen it, but do we have any figures on what the noise level is inside the identified 1,877 properties, what the noise level is inside and what the noise level is outside these properties?
So the noise levels outside the properties, these properties in particular, will be at around 55 decibels or higher, averaged over 8 hours in the nighttime period. The noise levels inside, we could estimate, but to be precise, you'd need to know the actual construction of each of those properties. But if people leave their windows open, then noise levels inside would be around 42, 43 decibels or higher. If windows are closed, then you would expect noise levels to be 25 decibels or slightly higher.
And the figures you've just given there, are they for daytime or nighttime?
It's a nighttime only issue. There's significant effect. It doesn't arise in the daytime.
Thank you. And finally, what is the acceptable noise level that the government says before any health implications?
The government doesn't set an individual noise threshold. It's not a black and white issue. Below this value, it's acceptable. Above this value, it's not. What the government expects any application to dealing with airports to do is to look at the merits of the application in its own terms. There will be local issues. There will be strategic issues that need to be taken into account. There are some numbers that the government sets as being important. In the daytime, anything above 51 decibels has an adverse effect. Anything above 45 decibels at night, these are external levels, has an adverse effect. And the government also says in policy that if properties are exposed to 63 decibels in the daytime or above, they would expect airports to provide mitigation. And that's a scheme that addresses that, is already in place and will be slightly enhanced as a result of this application if it's approved.
Kershid.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, many thanks for producing such a detailed report. What I would like to understand that you've mentioned about renewable sources you're going to utilize, but you didn't give a time scale that when that can be achieved.
Can I just clarify, are you talking in relation to the airport's carbon reduction plan? So the airport, when we sent out what's called the Regulation 25 request for further information, when they'd submitted the original application in January, they did say it would be accompanied by a carbon reduction plan, which was to show a couple of things. One was how they were going to try and get the airport operation down to being carbon neutral. And probably Dr. Hinnells is the best person to speak on that. But just for information, the Airport Operators Association does accredit airports as to how they're doing in terms of their emissions, their carbon neutrality, carbon reduction, those kind of things. So initially we didn't have a carbon reduction plan from the airport. When we submitted the request for further information, that came in, and it's an outline, and it shows that by 2026, the airport, for its buildings, its operations on the airport itself, will be seeking carbon neutrality. And for 2040, it's aiming to achieve the net zero target, which the council in its climate emergency has declared. In terms of how the airport achieves that, that is included in the planning application documents. And I mean, would you like to say anything on that? Some of the measures that address it?
I think.
Sorry.
There is some detail in the carbon reduction plan around that. That carbon reduction plan is to be reviewed on a 5-yearly basis to make sure it stays in line with UK targets and changing UK targets. But we have now, as David said, got the carbon neutral by 2040 plan at borough level, and the carbon reduction plan is aiming at achieving that. The measures by which that will happen will follow, but they could include solar on site and potentially solar off-site as well. But these are something that would be delivered under the plan.
2040 vision is a standard vision which we all wanted to achieve for Luton. So I just wanted to find out, specifically, you've talked about renewable energy in order to reduce the carbon emissions. So have you got a set period of time that this is you're going to achieve in that period of time?
Yeah. The neutrality is put down as 2026. The airport's application does include information about what they're doing, and in their annual monitoring report, which we report onto the OSB each year, they have been managing their emissions, their carbon. Some of it's through electricity providers, some of it is through better operations at the airport. So you start looking at different operations that are going on. So how they're using their buildings, what kind of equipment, do they have electric vehicles? So they are targeting that. They do produce a report, and the carbon, the condition that's added at the last condition proposed for this is for the carbon reduction strategy to be submitted within 12 months to actually give more detail. But they've actually been hitting their KPIs, the key indicators that they have to reduce, to become more efficient. There was one other thing I was going to say, but it's completely escaped my mind. So if it comes back, I'll say it.
Question is on page 55 and paragraph 83. It's stated that there's a mixed fleet and the introduction of new generation aircraft.
Sorry. On that point about renewables, there is a line in the carbon reduction plan on page 4 of the plan that says that the aim is to supply at least 25% of energy used by the airport. Page 4 of the carbon reduction plan. To supply at least 25% of energy used by the airport from on-site renewables by the end of 2026. And there is a target, I think, for, I'm just going through now. I think I've seen a discussion of a higher target as well, but I can't find it in the document at the moment. I think that might be under discussion rather than in the offering that we've got before us at the present time. But the present time is 25% renewable energy on site by 2026.
Sorry, just on that, it may be that the airport addresses could provide you with more information, because I see that the sustainability director is actually sitting here as well. But that might be later.
Thank you. Yeah, we already procure green energy. So all of our energy today is from green sources, and the 25% target by 2026 and 50% by 2030 are the 2 targets that we've set so far.
it's not been answered. Yes, it's on page 55 and it's paragraph 83. The question is about mixed fleet and the introduction of new generation aircraft. So what is the difference between, new mixed fleet and introduction of new generation aircraft? Just for my own clarity, I want to understand.
Okay. So the fleet mix is it's the type of airplanes that are being flown at the airport, and it varies with the different operators. So the key operators at Luton Airport, the two biggest are Wizz and EasyJet. They tend to update their aircraft sort of 5 to 7 years. So they've got fairly modern aircraft. One of my criticisms, as a resident who lives under one of the flight paths, but mine is Heathrow, is that I can tell when a British Airways aircraft flies over me because they tend to have older aircraft, possibly 20 odd years old, and they make a lot more noise. So these, the modern newer generation aircraft, one reason they get introduced is because they're much more efficient, but the efficiency then gets transferred in terms of noise outputs. So what we tended to have looked at in this, arising from aircraft at Luton, you're looking at aircraft which is the Airbus A320 Neo, which is a new engineered option. So it's got an engine on it, which is much more fuel efficient and is quieter. So you've got the A320 Neo, the A321 Neo, and then there's the 737 Max. Sorry, I always get its number wrong. Which is the one that Ryanair flies. I think the two main operators, Wizz and EasyJet, tend to use the Airbus. Ryanair uses the 737 Max. In the report, I think it gives you some information, for instance, that Wizz Air in their predictions are that they're going to take, I think it was something like 235 new aircraft over the next X number of years, of which 220 of them are going to be the new engined aircraft. So they're the quieter ones. So most airports are seeking to achieve. Airports obviously have issues with noise associated with them. So, for instance, Mr. Cole spoke about the Stansted public inquiry. Stansted are obviously looking at bringing in the new aircraft as well, but the airlines are introducing those because they are fuel efficient, and then they also address the issue of noise and bring the noise reduction. So the government advice to airports coming through things like the aviation policy framework and the document called Making Best Use is about sharing the benefits with the community. So as technology improves, the airlines should be upgrading their fleets, they should be getting the quieter, newer aircraft, and that produces better results for the local communities, which they should be sharing, which ultimately is how the noise levels reduce over the years 2028, 2031.
The applicants will get their chance to make their case as well, and they'll be open to questions and comments. So, okay. Councillor Hussain.
I'll come back to noise again. I'm going off Councillor Mahmood Hussein's earlier on question. I'm a bit confused, and Lee Bridgens, because the answer we got from the chap on Teams was that there is no noise implications. But if you turn to page 62, paragraph 127, then why have you got a fund, some sort of a noise installation fund, okay, which is currently is £100,000. Then in 2021 is £400,000. In 2022 is £900,000, and in 2023 is £700,000. So why is that kitty all of a sudden gone from £100,000 to £900,000 next year if there is no noise coming out from that airport?
Can I just answer the first bit? Sorry, it's David Gertler again. The person who was on Teams was commenting on air quality. So air quality in the environmental statement isn't having an issue. It's negligible. It's been classed as non-significant. So that he wasn't commenting on noise. In terms of noise, yes, there is an issue. So in Mr. Cole's presentation, he identified the 1,877 properties that will be exposed to significantly observable adverse effects level. What the airport operator in the original planning application was proposing to do was those large sums of money that you've just quoted for each year. What transpired when we looked at that with Mr. Coles was that Mr. Cole, was that actually those sums don't fully cover everybody who might expect to all the 1,877 houses. That amount of money wouldn't actually be enough to cover all of them. So we've actually taken the cap off. Those houses are exposed to noise. The worst year is predicted for those houses is predicted as 2022. What the report recommends and what's been discussed with the airport is that if in 2022 1,877 houses are exposed to that increase in the significantly observable adverse effect level, for 6 years thereafter, those houses will be entitled to claim the compensation to get the noise insulation. So that's what the noise insulation fund is for, because there's no way by 2022 that all the houses could be insulated in that time. And 2023, they wouldn't have all been insulated. So we're saying it's not mitigation because it doesn't actually address the fact that these houses will experience the significant observable adverse effect. They will be entitled to insulation for a period of 6 years after that effect. But on Vernon Cole's graph, you saw that by 2028, the line is dropping. So lots of those houses will have dropped out of the contour where they're entitled to noise insulation. But because they've been exposed to it in the year 2022, for 6 years, they're entitled to it thereafter. So no one's saying that there isn't a significant effect and that it doesn't need to be addressed. In terms of Mr. Loosley commenting, that was definitely on emissions associated with air quality.
And the grant that you're talking about, that any resident, one of those 1,800 residents is titled to £3,000, yeah? Is that the one ECA originally limited the amount to 3,000?
Currently, the noise insulation fund is £3,000. So for habitable rooms, for a house, it's entitled to £3,000. There's a contractor comes and looks at it. It's administered by the LAC, the London Luton Airport Consultative Committee, which is made up of a lot of the representative groups who will be speaking tonight. It's administered by them, identify the properties that are affected, that fall within the contour where noise insulation is to be provided. The airport has increased that amount. Currently it is at £3,000. I think in the report we say it's going to be £4,000 per dwelling.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions. Next, we've got the objectors. So do you want to take a break now? Because there'll be 20 plus objectors and I don't really want to stop halfway through. Okay, so we'll break for 10 minutes now. Okay. I was just taking some legal advice. We'll now go on to the objectors. And the first objector is Councillor Sandra Clark on behalf of Flamstead Parish Council. Sandra, who is online.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Is that Sandra?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you loud and clear. Everyone else can. So you've got up to 4 minutes to state your case on behalf of the Flamstead Parish Council.
Thank you. Hello, councillors. I'm speaking on behalf of HAPC, Flamstead Parish Council, which is one of the villages under Luton Flight Path. I also sit on LAC. I have just listened to the presentation by the applicant, and to be honest, I'm horrified. I had a speech prepared, which I'm going on to, but I can't believe the blatant disregard for the thousands of people that have been affected by the blight of aircraft polluting our air and our quiet enjoyment of life. The applicant is trying to perpetuate aggressive expansion of Luton Airport, far more aggressive than was agreed in 2013. Times have changed since then. We are all much more conscious of carbon emissions and air pollution and how everyone needs to cut back on things like flying. The airport has admitted that it can control only 3% of its carbon emissions. The rest are down to the aircraft, and these aircraft have high-level effects which make their emissions 3 times more damaging than those from cars, for example. So the example of using the cars or travelling to the airport is more polluting is just simply not true. While we hear that electric planes and more sustainable planes are being developed, it's going to be a long time before they're able to take the place of these large polluting passenger aircraft. The noise contour chart that was shown to diminish in noise from 2024, I just don't think is correct, because we've had a pandemic, people have lost income and money, they've lost profits, they're not going to invest in the planes for quite a long time now. So I just think that is taking people down the wrong path. And we know that Climate Committee has said that aviation cannot continue to expand at its current rate. As a councillor myself, I just cannot understand why you would endorse such a blatant disregard for planning conditions that were imposed in 2013 by your own Development Control Committee. The airport operator knew it was releasing too much capacity too soon, and it did this in response to financial incentives from your own council. It's now looking to take another 45 million from you over the next 3 years to shore up its operation. That is public money. Why should it be used to support private enterprise, which is owned by a highly profitable Spanish company? As someone representing people living directly under the flight path, I am not prepared to see them treated like cannon fodder for the benefit of companies which run this airport operation, for the benefit of a council who doesn't seem to have a regard for overseeing its impacts. It would be utterly wrong to pass this application. It's not because it's needed. There's plenty of opportunity to grow back greener within the existing planning controls. Rather than considering whether to grant this airport further permission to expand, I would respectfully suggest that you should consider the amount of compensation you will be charged for part of the course in the planning commission. Thank you. Breach for the last 3 years. At least you would provide further information from the area you know. We all know that Luton Rising wants expansion to levels which will probably blight an entire sub-region and certainly involve your own council in even more financial risk. Surely this is the time to draw the line and say no. Perhaps need to consider diversifying and being more prudent in the future, rather than continuing to risk your town on kerosene burning asset which perpetuates the past rather than builds for genuinely sustainable future. Planning matters need to be decided on planning grounds, and we urge councillors to separate their minds on the issues of jobs and economics. The airport still has plenty of growth in its existing limits, and on this basis I urge everyone to reject the application. Thank you. I'm done.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Sandra.
Thank you.
Next one on my list is Clive Page, individual interested. And I think you're at the back there. You want to come forward, Clive, and there's a microphone, and you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm an individual objector to the airport expansion, essentially because of the expected increase in noise at night. I've lived in Luton for many years, not under the flight path, but near enough that we hear planes taking off and landing, and at night the noise sometimes wakes us up. As you've heard, the noise consultants all say that while modern aircraft are quieter, the airlines are only adopting them slowly. For the next few years at least, the noise nuisance will increase under this expansion plan, as it will allow more night flights, but the aircraft mix will stay much the same. Homes under the flight path, as we've heard, would be quite badly affected, while tens of thousands more residents, like us, would also experience an unwelcome increase in noise nuisance. The airport's only proposed solution is noise insulation, which is mainly double or triple glazing of windows. My essential point is this: the peak demand for night flights is in the summer, but in summer we also get heat waves, in fact increasingly often because of global warming. Luton has reached 25 degrees or more quite often in recent summers. When this happens, most people sleep with their windows wide open. The aircraft noise gets in full blast. Double glazing is completely pointless under these circumstances. We also know that the best way of reducing the spread of coronavirus indoors is ventilation with fresh air. So in many places, people are keeping windows wide open for much longer. These planning documents don't seem to have taken this into account. If the council wishes to approve this expansion, I hope it will do so while not allowing any increase in the number of night flights. Indeed, a reduction to 0, except in emergencies, would be welcomed by a large number of residents of Luton and indeed the surrounding areas. I think this could be done without greatly affecting the viability of the airport or the airlines, as night flights are really only a pretty small proportion of the total number of flights. Thank you.
Selix, on behalf of Hitchin Forum.
Can you hear me?
You've got up to 4 minutes.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Very well. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to the committee tonight. I'm speaking on behalf of Hitchin Forum, which is a community group concerned to protect the environment of Hitchin and North Hertfordshire. Members often walk or cycle in the area to the east of the airport's runway and are concerned about the noise impact. This was most recently brought home to me on Sunday, the 5th of September, as Wizz Air Flight 4471 passed over Lye Hill, Breachwood Green, heading for Tirana. It was the 32nd flight I'd heard that morning since leaving Whitwell, about 2¼ hours earlier. My walk, otherwise a pleasure, was marred by extended bursts of noise every 4 minutes or so. That last flight would have made conversation or anything requiring more concentration than walking impossible. Had I been a resident of Lye Hill, the previous 2¼ hours, imprisoned with closed windows on a beautiful autumn day, would have been intolerable. The Noise Policy Statement for England of 2010 aims to avoid all noise occurring at the significant observed adverse exposure limit and is mentioned as being a consideration in paragraph 126 of the Development Manager's report. Lye Hill falls within the 63 decibel noise contour. 63 decibels is the daytime limit, so residents are being exposed to noise which has been observed to have a significant impact on health, including serious cardiovascular disorders in adults and learning difficulties in children. The equivalent limit for nighttime noise is 55 decibels. If allowed, this proposal means that the occupants of a total of 1,900 dwellings approximately will be exposed to damaging noise. This equates to about 4,500 people, with an approximately 1,700 of those being newly exposed against both national and local policy. The report is effectively saying to these people, you might not notice much difference, but until things improve, you will be exposed to noise that could damage your health. The airport can't promise to provide sound insulation because it will take too long to roll out the scheme.
2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, Bill.
So you will get some compensation. By contrast, the effects of climate change are being felt worldwide and are even more damaging. The urgency of the crisis was recognised by Council in declaring a climate emergency. The Council's Climate Action Support Plan of January 2020 estimated the emissions the airport controls as being nearly 16,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2016. That figure was dwarfed by its Scope 3 emissions of over 310,000 tonnes, 40% of which come from flight emissions. These would be constrained by keeping within the current passenger cap. 56% of Scope 3 emissions come from the use of private cars used to travel to and from the airport. 31% of passengers are from the east of England, and many of them drive through residential areas of Hitchin, including its two air quality management areas, adding to the already high levels of nitrogen dioxide. I find nothing in the report to suggest any attempt has been made to examine public transport options or negotiate with North Hertfordshire. Yet paragraph 65 refers to the Sustainable Access Strategy, which aims to reduce the impact of surface access on the local community. To conclude, maintaining the passenger cap at the current level will not, as implied by Wizz Air's managing director on the 25th of November, compromise the airport's role in the local economy. This proposal, however, if allowed, will expose more people to dangerous levels of noise against national policy. It will result in increased carbon emissions, compromising the Council's climate goals. It will exacerbate the impact of airport traffic on Hitchin in particular. I therefore urge the committee to reject it. Thank you.
Oh, Mama. All right, yeah. I'll keep that and stretch over. Okay, so now it'll be Neil MacArthur on behalf of the Harpenden Residents Interest Group. Neil, are you there?
Yes, I am. In the chair.
Loud and clear. You've got up to 4 minutes because you're representing a group, an interest group.
Thank you very much. Harpenden Sky is a campaign group based on mitigating the effects of Luton Airport from an emissions point of view in the residents of Harpenden and the surrounding area. My focus today is upon air quality and the errors and emissions in the DMC report dated 30th of November. First of all, an emission. The Environment Act 2021 is now in force and it affects this planning application. The Environment Act specifically mentions transport, which in this case means the additional road and air traffic. A key Environment Act requirement is Part 4, Air Quality, Item 72, Local Air Quality Management Framework, which means, according to the Environment Act, and I quote, strengthening the local air quality management framework to enable greater cooperation at local level and broaden the range of organisations that play a role in improving local air quality. Responsibility for tackling local air pollution will now, and I emphasise the word now because this is now the law, be shared with designated relevant public authorities, all tiers of local government, and neighbouring authorities, and I emphasise neighbouring authorities. As the DMC report does not even mention the Environment Act, we request this application is declined and the full air quality implications of the Environment Act are assessed by local cooperation arranged in conjunction with Hertfordshire County Council and local Hertfordshire councils as required by the Act. So the Environment Act is the first omission. Secondly is an error. If you look at item 9 of the report, it states that 1 million passenger expansion will have, and I quote, slight, moderate, significant adverse effect on human health. Well, this is absolute nonsense. It doesn't make sense. But of course, it is a critical subject. The Environment Act states short-term exposure to elevated levels of air pollution can cause a range of health effects and is a particular threat to vulnerable groups, including the elderly, very young, and those with existing health issues. However, long-term exposure affects us all, with long-term exposure to man-made air pollution in the UK known to shorten lifespans, and I emphasise shorten lifespans. In Luton, there are 38 care homes and a major hospital. The majority will be affected by current and proposed increases to London Luton Airport operations emissions, but there is no mitigation action shown in the report. A further omission, item 44, highlights greenhouse gases as the, quote, most notable in relation to the proposed development, but it doesn't mention CO2. This is a significant error or omission. CO2 is the largest GHG component of aircraft emissions, accounting for approximately 70% of the exhaust source. So this omission needs to be resolved. And finally, omission again, item 15, states the 1 million per annum passenger aircraft increase will have more seats and increased load factors. This is very concerning as more seats per flight.
1 minute, please.
Thank you. These more seats per flight and increased loading generates a disproportionately more emissions. So LLAML must account for these emissions for the over 1 million per annum from larger aircraft and all the way to wheels up. This impact can then be discussed in conjunction with item 44 with neighbouring authorities as required by the Environment Act. These errors and omissions must be corrected, and therefore the application cannot pass until the data is shared with neighbouring councils, including Hertfordshire, and a joint plan for air quality agreed. That's the end of my statement, Chair.
Thank you very much, Neil. Any questions by members? No questions. Thank you very much, Neil. I'll call on Steve Gent now, who's in person, so you should be. You find a microphone there. An individual interested party. So you've got up to 2 minutes, okay?
Thank you. We've heard about the noise contour limit being breached in 3 successive years, but what does this mean for residents, particularly in South Ward? The majority of members of this committee will be unaware of the reality of living under the flight path of an airport. The noise impact is horrendous, even when living in a modern double glazed house. There'll be times of the day when flights are departing every few minutes and sleep is interrupted regularly by night flights. It's difficult to socialise outside with friends due to conversations having to be continually interrupted when flights pass over. During the evening, TV has to be paused when flights thunder over. I don't believe that triple glazing is being proposed for noise mitigation, but even if it was, it wouldn't solve the problems of summer when windows are open and residents want to spend time in gardens. It's suggested that approval will only result in a small number of extra flights, but what is ignored is that the current level was not meant to have been reached until 2026, when it was hoped that quieter aircraft would be available. The report suggests that there will be a temporary period of adverse impact for residents, but can 7 to 10 years be called a temporary period? What confidence is there that modern aircraft will save the day? Promises that 321neos would be quieter haven't become reality. And to increase the number of flights, airlines have added to the stock of older, noisier aircraft. There are no commitments that any new planes ordered will actually be based at Luton. Are you prepared to demonstrate your independence? Will you take note of the overwhelming majority of objections received and the council's own noise team? This is the wrong time to approve this application. Would it not be better to wait until at least 2026? By then we may know whether or not better aircraft are a reality. There'll be more knowledge of post-pandemic levels of demand and airspace reviews may have been completed. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions? Councillor Kirsch's.
Yes, sir. Question. I understand that you're going through all this, but have you got any alternatives or any recommendations? You know, rather than saying we are experiencing an issue day and night. So I rather listen to the recommendation alternatives, so we can get to the.
Yeah, Councillor Kirschid, is this a question to the objector?
Objector,
yeah. It sounded like it was to the applicants.
Okay. So I really want to hear, if there are any recommendation from your end or any alternatives you can propose, so we can take on board.
Probably not for me to make recommendations to this committee. My whole view is that this application shouldn't proceed at all at this time. There are so many uncertainties around it. The airport has rapidly ramped up the movements of air traffic above what was originally proposed when a thorough sort of investigation was done back, I think it was 2012. We're already at the limits where we should be in 5 years' time from now. We're experiencing the horrors of what 5 years from now would be, but we're experiencing it now. Now isn't the time to increase further.
Okay, any further questions to the objector? Thank you very much. Next one is Jeff Morgan on behalf of Airports Passenger Services. Online.
Yeah. Hello there. My name is Jeff Morgan.
And you've got up to 4 minutes.
Of the Airports Passenger Services Subcommittee. I help represent the interests of 18 million passengers a year that use Luton Airport. This application is not to increase passenger capacity during peak periods as the terminal is full, but to put more passengers through the terminal during less busy periods, both day and night. During peak periods, which extends through much of the day, passengers arriving in the departure lounge are forced to either remain standing or to sit on the floor due to a lack of public seating. This application is to increase the number of hours passengers are expected not to find any public seating. Again, passengers arriving from abroad during busy periods can't get into the arrivals lounge to clear customs and are forced to stand in corridors, often for up to 90 minutes. Again, this application is intended to increase the times in the day and night where queues are unacceptably long. Now, every year, the Which Consumer magazine carries out a passenger survey on all UK airports, where real passengers fill out a survey form. This wasn't carried out in 2020 due to COVID, but looking back on previous years, Luton comes bottom year after year, making the headlines as the UK's worst airport. This puts the town of Luton in a bad light, as many passengers see Luton as an extension of its airport. This application does not address a single issue regarding customers' complaints. In fact, this application will make a bad situation worse, as the application is based on greed. Now, many passengers are also residents of Luton. Looking at the bigger picture, we had COP26 less than a month ago. We also had Luton Borough Council declare a climate emergency. By refusing this application, you'll be making a powerful statement about your commitment to climate change now and the well-being of this town. I remind you, there is a council report that states that on average, 86 people in this town die every year due to pollution. Finally, I remind this committee that if you reject this application, it can still go ahead, as it is included in the DCO application for 32 million passengers. At least then the decision will be taken by government and not the owners of the airport, who many see as a conflict of interest. As such, I call upon this committee to do the right thing, because otherwise the council will be accused of double standards and hypocrisy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions to the...
Yeah, can I just make a comment, please? No
problem with that.
Sorry, the speaker has said that he represents the subcommittee, the passengers.
No, I didn't say that. I said I'm a committee member of the subcommittee.
Okay, I just want to confirm that the chair of the consultative committee has confirmed that the speaker is a representative of Stop Luton Airport Expansion and cannot speak on behalf of the subcommittee.
I didn't speak on behalf of the committee. I said I'm a committee member of the Passenger Services Subcommittee. I cannot represent that committee because we have the applicant also as a committee member.
I think we'll move on now.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Next one, I've got Richard Playdale Bouverie, and I've got a note saying in-person attending but may not now be speaking. But if you've exercised your right, you can still do so. But then if you wish not to do so, then it's entirely up to you.
Definitely
not present.
He's not present. Apologies.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. Yes. And the next one is Julie Bell on behalf of Wheat Hampstead Preservation Society. Julie?
Okay. Good evening.
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
I think we'd like to see you. So that's it. I've got you now. You're loud and clear.
Okay.
You've got up to 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of Wheat Hampstead and District Preservation Society. That's an organisation with more than 400 households as members. That's in excess of 20% of the population of Wheat Hampstead. We hear from members and villagers in Wheat Hampstead several times a week about how badly affected they are by aircraft noise from Luton Airport in what is really a rural community. And the impact has increased enormously in the last 7 years since the expansion to 18 million passengers was allowed. While we are proud to have an international airport close by and fully understand the economic value it brings to Luton Council, we see no argument for increasing passenger numbers and removing previously agreed noise limitations. These proposed changes will blight the lives of future generations for many, many years to come and make a mockery of what the UK vowed to do in COP26 just last month. When Luton Council granted permission to increase passenger numbers to £18 million, it was done with the promises from the airlines and the airport that they would mitigate noise pollution with quieter aircraft and higher altitude flying. 7 years have passed and it is evident that these are broken promises. We have to wonder whether the technical solutions that were in the connection with the Jet Zero report will be yet another empty promise. And what weight will conditions that the council may impose, what weight will they have when they've been ignored previously? The airport continues to breach its noise restrictions until, of course, COVID came along and helped them. And now it has the audacity to ask for them to be removed. Car park expansion is also proposed, and we are concerned about the east-west traffic that comes through our village and along the Lower Luton Road. It's a rural lane, not an airport transit route. As democratically elected councillors, you're representatives of people who call for fairness and justice. Asking to increase passenger numbers to 19 million passengers is just greedy. That's a 6% increase. And if the council do not hold the airport to account for blatant disregard of noise conditions, it would be incompetent and deceitful and lose the confidence of those it represents. We ask you to make a decision that reflects the conditions and parameters the council had in mind 7 years ago when allowing radical expansion. Please focus on getting the airport and the airlines to honour those commitments they gave you then before agreeing to any further expansion. You're a development management committee. Surely you need to ensure developments already agreed are managed before the ground shifts again. Please make sure that the airport introduces noise mitigation strategies in advance of increasing passenger numbers so that we can really believe what they say is possible. We urge you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions by members? No, thank you. We'll now go on to Nigel Green on behalf of St Albans Quieter Skies. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to address the committee. As you know, in December 2013, the Venn Development Control Committee considered and approved an application by the airport operator to double capacity from 9 to 18 million passengers per year over a 15-year period to 2028. Quite regardless of the planning conditions and the Section 106 legal agreement, the airport operator released too much capacity too soon and initially broke through the noise footprint limits in 2017, just 4 years after planning permission was granted. Worse in 2018 and worse again in 2019. The only thing which stopped these breaches was the pandemic. There was a needless disregard for the principles of balanced growth which underpin all airport expansion. Eventually, there was an admission of mismanaged growth, flying too many aircraft before the fleet had been modernised, due to a failure of communication between business development and operations departments. But that does not excuse the Council's scrutiny team. The Council and the airport operator have between them failed to protect residents, and this wrong should not be excused by this committee. This planning application seeks to legitimise that corporate disregard for the democratic process which you uphold. It seeks to increase the noise burden rather than reduce it. It represents a needless and blatant disregard for development control, and it fails to explain why it is necessary. Not content with achieving their aspirations 9 years early at the expense of residential amenity and broken planning conditions, the same airport operating company is back again, asking you to believe their disputed forecast data and permit an increased noise footprint, asking you to overlook the fact that they are driven by profit over and above the well-being of the people of Luton. They have recently negotiated to deny a further £45 million of public money from this hard-pressed council over the next 3 years, rather than drawing on their own resources. London Luton Airport Operations Limited made operating profits of £40 million in 2017, £50 million in 2018, and £58 million in 2019. Each of those years were, of course, years in which they exceeded their planning conditions. A small loss for LLAOL in 2020 of £11 million compared to that nearly £150 million profit over the 3 prior years is not the disaster they are making out, and certainly no reason to bleed a further £45 million from your council.
1 minute, Nigel.
Thank you. The fat cats at Ardian and Aena had enjoyed the cream to the tune of €1.4 billion profit in 2019, so covering a tiny loss of less than 10% of that in 2020 is not unreasonable. For all these reasons, councillors, we ask you not simply to vote this application through, but to think very hard about it and the principles and values which lie behind it. As you will hear, there are fundamental errors in the calculation of environmental impacts, which add disrespect through the charge of commercial greed. We ask you to send this report back to correct these errors, to discover the actuality of the impact, and to ask searching questions as to why this application is necessary at all. Please reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Any questions for the objector? No? Then I'll go on to Carl Wingfield on behalf of the Harpenden Society.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me, okay?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay, well, you're probably grateful for that. Anyway, thank you for permitting me to.
Okay, we'll listen to you rather than see you then.
Yeah.
You've still got 4 minutes though.
Thank you. Thank you for permitting me to speak on behalf of the Harpenden Society. We asked the Planning Committee to reject the airport operator's application. Our reasons, as the Planning Officer report makes clear, the committee needs, in reaching its decision, to achieve a balance between the benefits of growing aviation and its environmental impacts. The report quotes government policy that a balance must be achieved between the benefits of economic growth and the social and environmental costs. In the case of noise, which is a particular concern to our members and many others, as you heard, government policy states that noise should be reduced and mitigated. Even the council's own planning policy refers to achieving economic growth via the airport, subject to reducing and mitigating environmental costs. The planning report details the social and environmental impacts of this proposal, acknowledging that they will increase rather than decrease. And numerous responses to the consultation have pointed out that the data supporting the airport's calculations is likely to understate those impacts. Mitigation offered in the case of noise is insufficient, as the report acknowledges. In relation to carbon emissions, the report argues that aircraft emissions are a global responsibility. They're not. Your council has pledged to show leadership and reduce carbon emissions as part of its climate emergency response. You as councillors have an opportunity to demonstrate that leadership again tonight by making clear that aviation has its part to play and that Luton Airport should fulfil your ambition to be the greenest of airports by refusing the additional growth. Thus, there are real and significant social and environmental costs which the planning report minimises. However, each additional aircraft flying over Luton and the surrounding communities every day won't be an insignificant experience, nor will the increased carbon emissions when we need to reduce them to stop the planet frying. In contrast, what economic benefits are highlighted? Employment is unlikely to increase significantly, and the report states that growth will safeguard and sustain existing jobs. But that will happen anyway as aviation bounces back. In short, this application offers little, if any, additional economic benefits. Furthermore, as the government observed in the capitalisation review earlier this year, the council needs to reduce its exposure to the airport. This application will only serve to increase that exposure and the associated financial risk. Already 2 years of concession fees have been avoided by the applicant and has recently secured a further £45 million rebate over the next 3 years. This will all be paid to the applicant's overseas shareholders and will not benefit the economies of Luton or its surrounding communities. Against this background, the case for permitting further capacity growth is not proven, particularly where it allows Wizz Air, the dominant airline, to dominate the thinking of the airport operator. This could be an extremely risky venture if the planning application is approved.
1 minute, Carl.
Thank you very much. In summary, in refusing this application, the committee will be upholding the council's well-judged planning controls and avoid the risk that Luton will descend into an airport-induced financial and environmental poverty by 2040. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Any questions by members? No questions? Thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you.
I'll now call on Nigel Tully on behalf of the Stop Low Flights from Luton. Nigel?
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Stop Low Flights from Luton.
You've got up to 4 minutes, and I can't see you, but I can hear you.
My camera is on, and I can see my picture in my screen, so perhaps it's happening at your end.
No. Anyway, carry on, please. We can hear you.
Good, but my camera is on, and I can see my own picture, so it's being received. Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of Stop Low Flights from Luton, a residents group concerned about the increasing noise and environmental impacts from this airport. People living in this area accept that there is an airport nearby, but we don't accept that the airport has carte blanche to disregard its planning conditions and impose an increasing noise burden on our communities. The decision in 2013 to permit expansion over 15 years was taken democratically and represented a fair balance between expansion and control. For the council to have incentivised more aggressive growth than the airport operator itself described in its master plan is outrageous. The effect has been for the airport to reach its passenger limit in 2019 rather than 28, as the earlier slide showed. The council and the airport have reaped a windfall from this growth, and our communities have suffered the disadvantages. The benefits have not been shared. In other words, since 2013, the airport has taken the benefits while imposing additional burdens on communities and breaking its planning conditions. The airport is now asking you to legitimise its breach of your noise controls, properly and democratically established in 2013. It gives no credible reason why it needs to set these aside. We ask you to impose rigorous and effective scrutiny and control of the way this airport is managed. It should have respected its noise conditions and responded to its own forecast that these conditions were going to be breached. It's not been responsibly managed for the last 7 years. That needs to change. Councillors, we recognise that this is a planning matter. We want you to refuse this application to uphold the probity of the planning process. This is an overriding concern. There's a clear conflict of interest between the council as owner and financial beneficiary of the airport and the council as the local planning authority. We ask you to make an independent decision looking at the facts of the matter purely from a planning perspective. The application does not adequately recognise that previous planning conditions have been persistently ignored. It entails further heavy impact on communities and will not deliver significant benefits above the original permission. Chair, that's the speech I prepared, and I've got just over a minute to go. I would like to make 2 other informal points. First, at the start of this meeting, quite rightly, declarations of conflict of interest were asked for, and none were recorded. Luton Borough Council is financially dependent on Luton Airport for its financial affairs, and the outcome of this planning application will have a significant impact on Luton Borough Council's finances. That is a conflict of interest in anyone's language, should be recorded in the minutes of this meeting, and I request all councillors present to consider that seriously for the sake of transparency, good governance, and any future inquiry that might become into whether this affair is being properly managed. My second point is this. I am overcome in all humility with the competence, the professionalism and the thoroughness of my co-objectors' speeches so far, only one of whom, Sandra Clark, do I know personally. You are hearing an impassioned outcry from serious people, not NIMBYs, people who care about the environment and who are suffering. Please take account of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Questions? Do we want to clarify?
Can you just clarify item number 1, please? The declaration of interest.
Yeah, that's what I'm alluding to, because we've heard it several times tonight that it's the council granted themselves planning permission in the past and possibly grant the permission this time. And I think that's been the subject of a lot of debate tonight. So can we have some kind of response and answer?
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, everyone. It comes up quite often in relation to councils dealing with what are seen as their own planning applications. This planning application has been made by Luton London Airport Operations Limited. My view is the reason why none of the councillors in here declared an interest is because there is no interest for you to declare. Had I thought there was, I would have mentioned it. Now, the simple point is councils can make planning applications, or indeed London Luton Airport Operations Limited can make planning applications to the local planning authority. Local planning authority has to obviously sit separately and consider matters. And anyone that, for example, if someone was a director of LAO, for example, or if someone was involved more specifically with LAO as an operator, maybe employment, something along those lines, then clearly you are close to the item, and that would be a personal and prejudicial interest or a disclosable pecuniary interest. However, the council may well benefit from this planning application, but that does not mean that you have a personal and prejudicial interest, indeed therefore a conflict of interests. However, you do obviously have to sit here and take into account the economic benefits that are referred to in the report, but not the specific benefits that the council apparently receives. Put simply, if it were an interest, then councils wouldn't be able to deal with these applications. And the question therefore arises, who would actually deal with and either grant permission or refuse such applications? And there is actually no answer to that. However, notwithstanding that final point, which is who would actually determine this application, my view is there is no interest for you to declare. Thank you, Chairman.
I completely disagree with that position and think it's totally wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nigel. The next one is Stuart Durndell on behalf of Brickhill and Downlands Residential Association. Stuart. I can see you but can't hear you. Stuart? Yeah. Can you seem to be on mute, Stuart? Yeah, he obviously can't hear me. He's talking, yeah, but nobody can hear him. I don't think he knows he's on mute. Yeah? Well, can somebody give him a call and tell him there's a technical problem and we'll just to save time, we'll go on to the next one.
Who's going to do that?
Somebody call him. He's got a number there. So Matt. So we'll go on to the next one then. Walter Steele on behalf of the Preston Trust. But we will come back to Stuart Durndell. He's entitled to his 4 minutes.
Good evening.
Walter?
Good evening, Chair.
Yeah, you've got up to 4 minutes to speak on behalf of your organisation.
Thank you. I'm speaking as Chair of the Preston Trust on behalf of the members and wider community in and around Preston. The Trust is a registered charity whose objectives include the protection of Preston and promoting high standards of planning. Councillors, let me first voice our support for the representations from the other objectors this evening. We are concerned about noise, global warming and the local environment, and the way growth has been faster than plan or current planning consent. However, please consider the uncertainties in the information which has been presented, supposedly to enable you to make a very definite yes or no decision whether to support this application. All who will be affected by it deserve to have a high degree of certainty about impacts. The information in the planning report and in the application is full of uncertainty. For example, new variants of COVID continue to emerge. It is unclear how much they will affect international travel. Predictions at the start of this year for a rapid bounce back were not met. The predictions given for numbers of flights and passengers this year were not met. We're told the next year will be the noisiest year, but nobody can know that for certain because these are not normal times. The report plays down the significance of just 1 million more passengers, claiming that relatively few additional flights will be needed, but does not explain why that should have such an effect on the noise footprint. If airlines are going to invest in quieter aircraft and more passengers will be travelling on less flights, why is the noise footprint in 2028 so much larger than it was originally meant to be? The climate is changing rapidly, and the effects are becoming more severe as each year passes. It may be of overriding concern to us all that everything possible is done to minimise personal and corporate carbon footprints. People are thinking twice about whether they really need to fly as much, and if demand reduces, there is no need for this extra headroom. The Climate Change Committee is also looking at the next carbon budget and may well recommend a reduced target for aviation. But even without further changes, the government is committed to net zero by 2050, and that will have an effect on all sectors. The government's Jet Zero proposals are heavily reliant on non-existent or at least non-scaled new technologies such as electric planes, hydrogen fuels, zero-emission flight, carbon capture, and an assumption that biomass, which may be urgently required for feedstocks, would somehow be justifiably used for flying, and that greener fuels would be affordable. Planting saplings is clearly not the answer in the time that remains. Your planning officer is clearly a fan of the decision-making at Stansted, as paragraph 96 of the report shows. However, what has escaped attention is that Stansted's permission eats up, along with Heathrow, any remaining capacity for expansion within net zero limits. Luton Airport still has a very high percentage of passengers arriving by car or taxi. These are not all going to convert overnight to electric vehicles, changing behaviours, and without, for example, east-west rail links or even rail links from other places than London and Bedford is very unlikely. Charging extra for parking simply means people dump their cars in local streets. Your consultants who examined the draft carbon reduction plan were not complimentary either, and simply monitoring and reviewing as suggested in paragraph 107 is no substitute for action against a clear and achievable set of targets. Apropos the claimed economic benefits, the best contribution to the economy comes from those who balance the economic impact of the harm from their business models with the claimed benefits. If the other objections do not give sufficient grounds to reject the application, we assert there is no rush to pass this application, and it would be far better to wait until there is much less uncertainty and more solid evidence on which to base a decision. We therefore ask you to vote against granting permission now and to recommend a pause until the overall position is clearer. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Any questions to the objector? Okay, thank you very much. We'll return now to Stuart Dundell on behalf of the Brickhill and Downlands Residents Association, who was we couldn't hear last time. I can see half of you and I can hear you.
Right, how's that?
So if you start, you start again, please. You've got up to 4 minutes.
Okay, many thanks, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stuart Dundell and I'm the chairman of the Brickhill and Downlands Residents Association in Pepperstock, which is a small area just outside Slip End. We actually live under the flight departure flight path, which you can imagine is quite a noisy place to be on occasions. And I represent 90 homes, which is made up mainly of, shall we say, elderly people or older people, because most of us are retired. It's a happy place to live. And whilst we're aware of what happens with airports and noise and all the rest of it, we do feel that enough is enough. Noise is a horrible environmental pollution, and the World Health Organization clearly states that recognises that noise at night increases the risks of stroke and heart disease. Whilst looking at that, and we realise that flights have to go on, night flights are a particular issue, and we feel that they should be abandoned altogether, except for emergencies, obviously. We've noticed, obviously, during the COVID epidemic, we've had the delight of very few aircraft, so very little noise, but now it's started up again. We have flights from 6 o'clock in the morning, and even not as often, but flights during the night as well, which make our lives difficult. To the point where we don't know how this affects all our well-being at any one time. The point is that until the airport can actually do something to reduce noise, it shouldn't be expanding anymore. We've been told that aircrafts are supposed to be getting quieter, but planes are getting louder. And also, we do notice that as we're directly in the path of the aircraft, there is a lower trajectory. They're not as high. Wizz Air seems to be going out lower than perhaps EasyJet or Ryanair. I don't know whether, I have no substantiation for that, but that is the feeling. But the air quality has to be affected with these tiny particles which come from burning aviation fuel. Also, we're quite close to the M1. which is getting more and more busy in recent years. And of course, that generates pollution as well as people travelling to and from the airport. An extra 1 million passengers a year is 5,400 journeys to and fro every single day. Of course, everyone is now worried about climate change. And again, it's not the right time to be flying more aircraft or encouraging more people to drive to and from the airport. There is no sustainability in that. Not in the sense of leaving the planet in a better state than you found it. More and more people are going to realise this, and it seems a bit short-sighted to be continually relying on the airport for future prosperity.
Yeah, one minute, Stuart.
Right. COVID has been terrible for everybody. And notice that some quality of life has returned to us when far less aircraft were flying. People just can't understand why the airport takes priority to everything else, and how Luton Council can cause so much misery to folk who don't get any benefit from all the revenue derived. How can we ever get respite from repeatedly loud flying aircraft? Agreed number flying over us for over 3 years when the airport has broke its noise limits. And how can the people I represent have any confidence in the promises the airport will be a good neighbour and Luton Council is in control of what they do, when these promises mean nothing? Before anything more gets done, more expansion.
Thank you, Stuart. Can you wind up now, please?
Yes, sir. So on behalf of DADRA, as we're known, we would like you to reject this proposal. As all the other speakers have said, this affects us directly. We are directly under the flight path. When planes fly over in the summer, the shadow goes over my house. Be assured it's not a pleasant experience. Many thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Stuart. Any questions to the objector? Go on next to Councillor Jane Timmis on behalf of Watling Ward Decorum Borough Council. Jane,
Yep.
you've
Hello,
got up to 4 minutes. I can hear you.
Can you see me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I don't know whether you can see me or not.
Yeah, I can see you and hear you clearly.
Excellent.
Okay, you've got up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is Jane Timmis. I'm a Decorum Borough Councillor representing a ward which covers Flampstead and Markyate villages in Hertfordshire. Our residents live under the westerly departure route, which takes 70% or more of aircraft taking off from Luton day and night. We have had promises that Luton Airport would look at ways of mitigating the effect of noise on our area, like varying the routes or getting planes higher more quickly, all to no avail. This application is in essence about Luton Airport, who, having reneged on their promises in a previous planning application for expansion in 2013, who are now reapplying for a further expansion while making the same promises. How can we, the public, trust a borough council that is flying in the face of public consultations, 3 of them, that demonstrated a full-throated objection to the principle of the expansion of the airport to 19 million passengers per annum? How can we trust this decision when the council is both poacher and gamekeeper? How can we trust the planning system if decisions are influenced by big business? And how can we trust London Luton Airport Limited to deliver the conditions, promises on noise, environment and climate change mitigation when they have not delivered on similar conditions imposed at the last expansion application in 2013? Noise is the principal complaint of local people. There is little evidence that Luton Airport have mitigated aircraft noise as promised in the conditions set in the 2013 planning application. There is evidence that Luton Airport blatantly breached the noise contours in 2017, 18 and 19. Only in the last few years have any quieter planes been introduced, and then in rather small numbers. There's no obligation on the airlines to deliver them. The Airbus 320neo is a little quieter, but the Airbus 321neo has been proved to be no quieter and is a bigger and more popular plane. Until they can find ways of demonstrating that they have quieter aircraft, there should be no allowance made for promises of quieter aircraft and noise mitigation. The mitigation of insulating houses near the airport, mainly in Luton, is like box ticking. It helps only if you have all the windows shut. Airspace change projects are still to be implemented and still years away, which may or may not influence the current impact of noise. Climate change and carbon footprint. The Climate Change Committee Report 2020 advised the government that in order to achieve a net zero carbon emissions by 2050, there should be no further expansions of UK airports. That's already been challenged.
Minute left, Jane.
Planting trees hundreds of miles away does not compensate for the carbon footprint of an airline. Offsetting is off-putting. Other methods of electric aircraft and less damaging fuel are still on the drawing board, and the resultant increase of road traffic in the area, especially on Hertfordshire roads, is adding to the carbon footprint of the airport. We're not saying close the airport. We are saying that in light of the slow response to noise mitigation and climate change mitigation, there is no need to expand further, especially in the light of recent pandemic and catastrophic climate change effects. There should be no granting of this expansion to 19 million passengers and more aircraft movements to the detriment of not only Luton residents, but mainly to a large number of Hertfordshire residents. I urge you to look into your heads and hearts, not Luton Borough Council's pockets, when deciding on this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jane. Any questions by members? No, thank you very much, Jane. We'll move on now. Barry Arends, an individual interested party. Barry, are you there? Barry? Okay, we'll have one more go later on. Then.
Can you hear me?
Can right. Now. Barry?
Okay, I'm not sure if you can see me at all.
I can't see you, but I can hear you loud and clear, so that'll be okay.
Okay.
You've got, you've as an interested individual, you've got 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not going to deal with anything other than just emissions, and carbon dioxide emissions have already been largely dealt with. But I'm concerned with emissions, for example, the speed at which commercial aircraft take off, or rather land, is between 150 to 165 miles an hour. Now, pollution from tyre wear in cars can be 1,000 times worse than what comes out of a car's exhaust. This is according to emissions analytics. I'll just quote quickly: harmful particle matter from tyres and also brakes is a very serious and growing environmental problem, one that's being exacerbated by the increasing popularity of large, heavy vehicles such as SUVs. Well, clearly, aircraft are far heavier than any SUVs, so just bear that in mind. I'm therefore going to move on to air pollution from aviation fuel. This is from the Environmental Health Journal, a respected journal, and I'll quote, make an actual quote. Aircraft emission levels were associated with increased hospitalization for asthma, respiratory and heart conditions, especially in susceptible subgroups, potentially contributing to cancer, asthma, respiratory and coronary heart disease. This was around Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands, which is, well, much bigger than Luton, I know. However, it says here that the majority of non-volatile airport emission particles are carbonaceous, and aircraft engines emit large amounts of very tiny particles. Particle numbers near airports are significantly higher than away from airports. In other words, they're much closer around airports. And jet engines are a significant source of ultra-fine particle numbers. The highest concentration of ultra-fine particle numbers.
Can I ask you to sum up now, Barry?
Right. This isn't good news for those living downwind of Luton Airport. For all the above reasons, I ask the committee to reject this application.
Thank you. Any questions?
And thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Thank you.
Next one is David Oakley-Hill in person, because I can see him at the back. You've got a microphone, David, and then you've got up to 4 minutes as a representative on behalf of Friends of the Earth.
Thank you. 8 reasons to refuse the application. 1, climate emergency, drought, fires, floods, hurricanes, life support breaking down, fossil fuel addiction taking us to 3 degrees, young people frightened and angry. The UN, David Attenborough, the Queen and Greta urge us to listen to the scientists. We can't put things off or make the wrong choice. The next 10 years are crucial. In that time, there will be no large commercial planes that don't rely on fossil fuels that wreck our thin atmosphere. 2, the government's 6th carbon budget requires emission cuts by 78% by 2035. Its climate committee said no airport growth anywhere. Going back to pre-COVID levels and more expansion is suicidal. 3, government loaned Luton Council 35 million this year on condition that it reduce reliance on the airport. Thousands of green jobs could be created in Luton by 2030. 4, government said in April 2021 that aviation and shipping impacts must be included in all proposals and council climate plans. Climate doesn't care about economics. We need to follow Norway. Every financial decision must consider and reduce carbon impact. To get transport, buildings, waste and food to carbon neutral in a big town is a huge task we must take seriously. Airport expansion conflicts with that, wiping out good actions. 5, you're asked to approve expansion with an out-of-date master plan and no carbon reduction strategy. Local plan policy says airport expansion will only be supported with an up-to-date airport master plan. Neither the master plan or so-called carbon reduction plan, a wish list, not a strategy, give methods, times and targets for tackling emissions from planes and traffic. We're told there'll be a carbon reduction strategy along in 12 months. You're asked to vote that it's possible to avoid, reduce and remedy bad environmental impacts of expansion. It is not possible. National planning policy framework requires big cuts to greenhouse emissions from flights and traffic to protect society and the environment. 6, Luton Rising says green growth only, but promises are easy. Emissions must not rise from present levels, but 51% of the damage caused by the airport is from
minute left, David.
Thank you. Planes in the sky. 48% is from airport traffic. It's hard to do much about this. We need to cut emissions now. Until planes are fossil fuel free and most people are driving electric vehicles, we need a no-fly decade where only vital journeys are made. Not flying is the single biggest choice people can make. France is cutting domestic flights and encouraging trains. Germany and Sweden tax flights already. 7, air pollution, biggest killer on the planet. Before COVID, Luton was UK's worst polluted town with a big health problem. Where pollution is higher, risk from COVID is 75% greater. Deliberately making health worse will blow apart Luton Council's aim of zero poverty. And 8, personal responsibility. When your child or grandchild asks what you did in the Great Warming, will you tell them, I helped expand the airport? Or will you say, I helped to keep flying down, inspired residents to come together to tackle the climate threat, and kick-started training and partnerships for low-carbon green jobs to protect your future?
Thank you, David. Any questions to David Oakley-Hill? Thank you, David. The penultimate one. is Kevin MacDonald on behalf of St Albans Noise Defence.
Sophie Barber.
I've got a tick question mark. Is she present?
It's me. I'm present.
No, I've got Sophie Barber is actually made a representation, but is not present. Oh, you are. Oh, Sophie, would you like to come forward? So you're an individual interested party lives near the airport. So you've got up to 2 minutes to make your representation.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. My apologies for missing you, but somebody filled the sheet in for me. It wasn't me.
Fine. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I quote, "The climate and nature emergencies are the starkest issues facing humanity." A thought-provoking sentence from Liam MacArthur whilst debating the decarbonising of Scotland's transport in the Scottish Parliament. We live near Luton Airport and suffer the pollution and noise from all aircraft arriving into Luton, and when the wind is in an easterly direction, we suffer the increased pollution and noise from aircraft taking off. We have lived in St Paul's Walden for 31 years and have seen the airport grow at an astonishing and sadly illegal rate. 2028 was the date to reach 18 million passengers, but by 2019, the airport had already reached its target of 18 million and then wanted to double its capacity. I attended many of the planning consultations during that winter of 2019, taking place around the villages. I and others talked to hundreds of local people who did not want any more aircraft polluting the air they breathed or any more jet noise at night, keeping them awake. We, as humans, are, as you know, destroying the planet that we actually rely on to survive. In fact, we could be the first species to knowingly make our own kind extinct. This is primarily due to us burning fossil fuels, which contributes a hefty 89% towards the heating of the planet. Extreme weather disasters have already become part of the new norm, with many countries suffering extended droughts and devastating floods, making the growing of food crops impossible. Some islands have already disappeared under the rising sea, and other countries are losing acres of coastline as the seawater levels continue to rise. With this all in mind, I, on behalf of life on Earth, demand that you take responsibility for your part in exacerbating the present climate emergency and reduce the number of aircraft and reduce the number of passengers, not increase them. Until such time that aircraft can run efficiently on clean power made from truly clean and truly renewable energy.
Can I ask you to sum up now, please?
Okay. We all have responsibility to care. Parents care for their children, friends care for their friends, strangers care for others who need help. Councils care for the local residents. But if you all agree to the application to increase passenger numbers in Luton Airport, you will be killing your residents, not caring for them. I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Any questions? Thank you very much. Now I'll go on to the penultimate one of Kevin MacDonald on behalf of St Albans Noise Defence.
First of all, thank you, Chair, for allowing our late application.
Yeah, you've got 4 minutes because you're a representative of an association.
Indeed. I'm speaking on behalf of STAND, St Albans Noise Defence, and I'd like to focus on the environmental statement, which is such an important part of this application, and which has to give a fair, accurate picture in order for you, the councillors, to make a safe decision. Its purpose is to assess and describe what the environmental impact of the proposed development would be compared to the situation in which the development did not happen. In environmental terms, the key impacts of the application would result from additional passengers and increased noise. The situation is complicated by the fact that non-permitted development has already occurred, in that the noise footprint limit was breached in 2017, 18 and 19. The airport operator, incentivised by your council through a financial deal which led to aggressive growth, grew capacity way beyond levels that could be mitigated by newer, quieter aircraft. As a result, the noise footprint limits were broken 3 years in a row, and the passenger limit was reached 9 years earlier than originally intended. The fairest way to understand the properly managed intended impacts would be to work from the original growth rate, factoring in the kind of technology developments by way of quieter aircraft which have emerged, and ensuring that provisions of both passenger limit and the gradually reducing noise footprint limit were all respected. Problem is, the environmental assessment does not make clear that this was done, so you can't really make a safe decision on that basis. What we do know is the public comments are 4.5 to 1 against this application. And if you look up the supporters, the majority of them either work at the airport or supply it, and many of them don't live in the area affected by its environmental impacts. There is overwhelming local public opposition to this application for good reason. If you or I got planning permission to build one house and instead built two, we'd be told to tear one down. Yet when your airport drives expansion twice as fast as it was meant to, your council takes no action at all, but simply invites the airport to regularise its wrongdoing by making a planning application. That's just wrong, particularly when no mitigation can be offered to the wider community. None of the promises by the airport operator to reduce noise have materialised. The Chief Executive Officer of the airport operator has been active in the trade press and online, trying to garner support, while not providing a fair and balanced picture of the adverse impacts of this commercially motivated development. He has not explained why his business has breached the planning conditions and the legal agreements it has signed up to. So if you have not been given a clear enough information on which to base a fair decision, what's more, the airport operator has also submitted a noise application plan.
1 minute left, Kevin.
Yep, to DEFRA, in which it committed to abide by its noise footprint limits, when it knew only too well that it had broken them. This is not the action of an honest business or a good neighbour. Nobody wants to punish the economy of Luton. The planning permission granted in 2013 was for a development which would bring jobs and prosperity to the town, and this can still happen as you build back greener. But please, just insist that this is done within the original environmental impact limits and reject this application. Otherwise, we will feel that there has been a gross breach of trust, compounded by this attempt to rewrite noise limits on the back of what appears to be a stalking horse application. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions? Okay, I'll go on to the last one. Well, the last one tonight, anyway, and that's Chris Hayden. Is it Haddon or Hayden? You want to come forward? Individual interested party. So you've got up to 2 minutes, Chris.
Yes.
Oh, do you want me to start again? I will start that sentence again, so I might slightly run over 2 minutes. The World Health Organization, the G20 countries. 2 minutes.
You can have the advisors. You can have your 2 minutes again because the microphone wasn't on, so it wasn't being recorded.
So I start again.
So yeah, you're lucky tonight. You get an extra 2 minutes.
That means you get to hear me quiet.
That's all you're going to get anyway.
Okay. To support this application, there are over 20 sections and 9 documents submitted by the planning officer and Wood that refer to the pandemic and the recovery, all based upon unsafe forecasts from the non-independent Airport Council International Organisation. None cover a no recovery or future pandemic scenario, and so this application is flawed. Although the planning report recognises the uncertainty of a post-pandemic recovery and Wood's submission covers health, both do not address the fact that we are in an age of pandemics. COVID has had a worldwide impact, whereas SARS, Ebola and MERS hasn't. Nipah, Zika and Lassa are in the top 10 of the next pandemics to come and may have a greater impact on our lives and travel than COVID. Both the planning officer and Wood have missed a consultation objection based upon future pandemics. At least one future pandemic is predicted before 2028. Because of our own actions, pandemics are becoming riskier to humans and are easily spread by global travel. The World Health Organization, the G20 countries, and leading figures such as Sir David Attenborough have clearly outlined these threats. What if there is no recovery or a decade before any recovery? What is there if there is another pandemic before any recovery? The applicant, the council and Lau rely on the airport for jobs, wealth and economic growth, and yet haven't conducted a no recovery or new pandemic risk analysis. A fatal flaw. And so how can our councillors now make a fair judgment on this application? No lessons appear to have been learnt from this ongoing COVID pandemic. This application is no longer valid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Any questions? Thank you very much. Right, now I'm going to adjourn the meeting until 6 o'clock tomorrow, Wednesday, the 1st of December, where the first item on the agenda will to hear the representations of Andrew Lambourne, representing Laddercan. And then we'll go on to the applicants. And you've probably heard what has been said by the objectors tonight. And if you want to cover some of that as well, okay. So it will be Andrew Lambourne, then it goes to the applicants, and then questions by members, discussion and comments, and then we'll go to the vote. Okay. And I've just been reminded, well, I remind members not to discuss the application outside